Okay, so we've looked at this Mvvm project in Visual Studio. We've looked at its view model, we've looked at the view, and we've looked at the code behind. Now the next thing I want to show you quickly is the design data. Notice here in the runtime version we have the words "Hello World, we are here." Let's open up Expression Blend at the same project and see what it looks like. So here is the same project. Mvvm base simple with its core Mvvm, design, and properties, the main view model, and the main view. And here we see in Expression Blend we have an Objects and Timelines window on your left that gives us the hierarchy of WPF controls that we're currently using. The top being window, and then grid, and then our text block. So notice that this text block on our design surface says this is design data and not what we would have thought would be "Hello World, we are here." This is accomplished through design data. Now we've chosen in this particular layout to put the design data in a separate file. So if this class is called main window view model, a main view model, this is called design main view model, and it derives from main view model. It's a way we can have all of the properties defined in the view model, but we can change what they mean here in the designer. So notice how this says this is design data. So I can say we were here. And if I save this file and then come over to Expression Blend, I just go to Project, Build, and as this builds, notice how the designer changed to the new data that we put in the design data. So this is design data, we were here. This is the linking between the view and the view model. Now this design data is linked up through a property on the view here. So what we're doing here is we're saying set the Windows data context to, and we're giving it an explicit class. We're saying set it to this class, design main view. And we know that the design main view model is derived from main view model, so everything within the main view model will be available within this class. Now we have a special little symbol here, this D here, and the D is, you see up here, it's defined as ignorable. What that means is only in the designer or in debug mode will this designed view model be assigned to the view. In release, this XML or XAML code will not even be running or compiled in release mode. So it's a really good way to hook your design data to your view without the complexities of having a view model locator or anything else that has to run during your design time. So now let's go back over to Blend and let's take a look at some more parts of what Blend offers to the design process. So if we look over here, we have three tabs. We have the Properties tab, and this one will change itself to match whatever we click on. So if I click on the text block, now I'll see the properties of a text block, much like you would see the properties inside of Visual Studio in the Properties tab there. Same thing. I have searches, so I can search for the text of this text blocks, and we see right here that it says this is design data, we were here. So this is the actual text that's defined. Now notice also that it's yellow, and there's a little box out here called Advanced Options that's also yellow. This is important because this is saying that this particular property is participating in a data binding. Now if I were to click this little button here on the left, we get a menu, and we see that it's yellow, representing data binding, element binding, or template binding. I know that we're using data binding here because this is bound to the message property in the view model. So if I were to look at the split view of this screen, I can see the code here, and you can see that it currently is attached to the message. Now if I were to take this binding out and put in hello, you see hello shows up in the design surface and now shows up in the properties for text, and notice that the text is no longer yellow and our box is no longer yellow. Now it's white. White meaning it's got a property set on it. Now if I were to click on this little box here and hit reset, it resets it back to the defaults. So it means it inherits that text property from its parent. Well, the parent doesn't set one, so it comes off of here. The design surface doesn't show our text anymore, and the text block no longer has a text property on it. See how it cleaned it up? So unlike other Microsoft GUI editors, much like Front Page would stick all sorts of extra code in their markup. Blend is very good about keeping things simple and letting you know whenever you have branched off of the defaults. Notice also here that this 22 point, it's got a white box, meaning we've branched off of the default there as well, because we can see here the font size. So I can clear that by going here and saying reset, and now the font size gets the default that is in window. So let's put the binding back, and I can show you a couple different ways to do that. We can come in here and we can retype it. Say text equals binding message. Except I got to spell binding right. And there it is. This is design data we were here, so that hooks up that way. Or I'll just delete this property. We can come up to this text window here, and we can click on this little box, and we can say data binding, and here we see our view model. See, it says design main view model. I can click on the message string and hit OK, and boom, we're bound that way. And there's another way to do it, which I actually like the most. We can switch over here to the third tab called data. And we can expand this. This is our data context. So this will represent all of the bindable properties and methods that are in our view model. And I can grab this message property and I can drag and drop it right on top of my text block. And notice the message there says data bind text block text to message. If I let go there, my binding is done for me automatically, and I don't have to type a thing. That's pretty fantastic. In addition to that, we can actually create new properties straight from this window. Suppose I just grab the message and drop it on a design surface, not on top of a pre-existing text block. Like it says here, if you look at the little tooltip, it says create a text block and bind its text property to the message. So if I drop there, it's going to create a text block and bind it for me. So voila, I've got two. So there's the three ways to do binding. We can type it by hand through the text editor. We can browse to it through the little binding advanced options off of a property, or we can drag and drop it out of the data context window. Alright, so now let's look at adding new properties to our view model that we may want to design against in the design surface. Let me do a couple undos to get our design surface back to how it was originally, right there. Okay, save that. So back over to our view model, and let's add a new property to the view model. So let's go to the main view model, and let's add a property. Now I'm going to add something really simple. A prop, and this is of type string, and we'll say username. Okay. And if I switch over to my blend and I compile again, all I have to do is touch any part of this window and the design data context will update. And here we see a new property, username. Great. So I'll drag and drop username right here below my other one, and it's created, and it's got the correct binding. See, binding username, but we don't have any data in it yet. So let's jump back over to Visual Studio and go to the designed view model, and let's add username, and notice that TeleSense knows what it is, equals a user. Now if I save and switch back to blend and build, our text jumps and we get a user in here. So we can see that the data binding is working. It's all registered as we would expect. Now if I were to go and jump back over here and run it, we don't see anything because that's the design data. The design data was implemented in the design main view model. So if we go over to the view model, and here I add a property, or a setting of that property, new user, and now run. Now we'll get new user. We see everything has been set. Okay, so you'll notice here in our view model we have two different looking properties. I have this very simple looking property, and I have this more complex looking property. What's the difference? Well, the simple one is what they call an auto property. Okay, you see the difference is one's an auto property and one is not. One's got a backing property and an extra little event here called raise property changed. The difference being, when we bind to an auto property, that is what's considered a one-time binding, meaning that when the view asks for the binding, it'll ask for it right when it's first rendered and say, get the binding. It'll bind to it and you're done. Now if you ever change this username property while it's running or through some business logic, the UI won't update because it doesn't know to update. It doesn't have anything hooked to username to check for whenever it's changed to automatically update itself. And this was done on purpose so that you wouldn't have a lot of unnecessary events firing back and forth between the UI layer and the view model layer. To make that interaction happen, you actually have to raise an event on that message and let the UI know that it needs to be updated. Now this right here, raise property change, and this lambda expression that says raise it on message, this is something that you get from Mvvm Lite. So this is because I'm deriving from view model base that I get this. If you didn't want to do it that way, the default way to do it is do on, I believe it's called on property changed, and then I type message. The on property changed event is enabled if you derive your model from a interface called iNotifyPropertyChanged. But even to hook onto it, you have to create an event called property changed event, then raise that event, passing it the string. It's much more complicated. Using this piece of code, this snippet from Mvvm Lite, allows me to raise the property changed event with one line with a simple lambda expression. The reason why lambda expression is even nicer than the on property changed event is the property changed event is a string. So if you ever renamed your variable, you're not going to get a compiler error saying you've renamed your variable. So this keeps everything in sync. It's very quick, and I've even created a little snippet that allows me to make them fast. I just type vm gprop, and I can just type string new message. So I can do that through ReSharper. It's really quick. If you don't have ReSharper, you can just copy paste this code, or you can make a little code snippet in Visual Studio and get the same type of thing. So let's examine what this is. I've got my backing variable called, I'll go back to this other one, called message. There we go. This is going to contain the actual variable. Then I have my property that when you get it, it returns message, and if you set it, if it's not the same as the previous message, so this is to cut out on any kind of chattiness, then go ahead and set the value and then a raise property changed event. And that's going to tell the rendering engine that there's a property named message that needs to be updated. So it'll find that property in the visual tree as it tracks up. Once it finds it, it'll see there's a binding on there, and then it'll re-pull down to the view model and pull that new value for the binding. It's great. It's how you do interaction between view and view model. That's an important thing. But you can still have these generic public strings in your view model, and that works just fine too. Just that's a one time. So if you think you're going to have a variable that you want to bind to once and never change again, use the regular old automatic property. If you think it's going to be changed and needs to be updated dynamically, then use this property changed event style property. Alright, you can also notice that if I have a private string in here, I'll make this a property as well. When I compile this and move over to my expression blend, it won't show up in the data context, even though I've just built. It doesn't show up. Only things that show up in your data context that you can bind to are public properties. So public fields you can't bind to. Private fields you can't bind to. Protected fields, internal, has to be a public property. Those are the necessary things to hook up the binding. Okay, so that's simple binding to text fields through Mvvm. Thank you.